The afternoon sun poured golden light over the busy runways of LAX International Airport, shimmering off the wings of dozens of departing jets. Inside Terminal 5, the chaos was routine. Families hugging goodbye, business travelers rushing with coffee in hand, and pilots moving with calm precision through the noise. Among them sat Emily Carter, a 28-year-old woman dressed in jeans and a light brown jacket, quietly observing everything from a corner seat near Gate 47. Her eyes were calm, focused, but her posture carried a certain stillness, the kind that comes from training and discipline, long forgotten by those who never had to use it. She was booked on Transair Flight 209, a long-haul commercial route from Los Angeles to New York. It was just another flight for the crew, but not for her. Emily had chosen seat 15C, deliberately. Aisle seat. Mid-cabin, quick access to exits. Old habits died hard. As passengers began boarding, she smiled politely at the flight attendants, keeping her carry-on light, a small black duffel bag with no tags, no markings. Inside, just essentials, a worn-out leather notebook, a pair of aviator sunglasses, and a single silver dog tag engraved with the name Phoenix. To anyone else, she was just another traveler. But to those who once flew beside her, that name carried weight. It was whispered in hangars, in control towers, and among pilots who'd seen things they were never supposed to talk about. The engines roared to life and Flight 209 began taxiing. The rhythmic hum of turbines filled the cabin as Emily looked out the window. For most, this sound meant routine. For her, it meant memories. The thunder of jet engines, the push of G-forces, the call signs crackling through radios at 30,000 feet. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the vibration under her seat pull her back into the sky she once ruled. High above the Pacific, the flight leveled out smoothly. Passengers settled in, some reading, others watching movies. The crew moved gracefully through the aisles, serving drinks and smiling like professionals who had done this 1,000 times. Emily leaned back, a faint smile touching her lips. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. At 32,000 feet, peace rarely lasted long. Somewhere along the East Coast radar grid, a controller at NORAD noticed something strange. A second signal appearing close to Flight 209's transponder. A small blip, inconsistent, flickering in and out. It wasn't another aircraft on a known flight path. It wasn't a weather anomaly either. Something or someone was shadowing the commercial plane. NORAD's response was quick but cautious. 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons from the 187th Fighter Wing were scrambled from a base in Missouri. Their orders: intercept and visually confirm. Back aboard Flight 209, turbulence began to shake the cabin. Seatbelt lights flickered on. A few passengers looked around, nervously as the jet shuddered through. Invisible air pockets. Emily didn't move. She had felt worse turbulence before, at Mach 1.5, over enemy territory. The captain's voice came through the intercom, calm and reassuring. Routine turbulence, nothing to worry about. But in the cockpit, the co-pilot was frowning at the instruments. The radar was showing interference. Minor at first, but it was there. As the plane continued eastward, the skies outside began to shift. The soft blue horizon gave way to a sharp crimson tint as the sun began to set. Golden light scattered across the clouds, illuminating the aircraft like it was flying through fire. Emily's reflection stared back at her from the window, eyes cold and distant. She touched the dog tag under her jacket again. For the first time in years, she whispered the word in her mind: Phoenix. Down below, at a radar control center in Colorado Springs, communication lines buzzed. The 2 F-16s had locked visual on Flight 209, but something wasn't adding up. There was no second aircraft. Just one civilian jet moving normally, but the fighter pilots were getting a scrambled IFF, identification, friend or foe response from it, something only military. Aircraft should transmit. The lead F-16 pilot radioed in his confusion. That's when his wingman froze mid-sentence, because through the static, a faint voice came across the encrypted frequency, a voice that shouldn't have been there. Calm, confident, female. And the only word she said was her call sign, Phoenix. The control room erupted. That name wasn't unknown to them. Phoenix was a code name used years ago during a classified U.S. Air Force mission. One that had gone horribly wrong. Officially, everyone on that mission was declared dead. Unofficially, Phoenix had vanished. Back in seat 15C, Emily sat motionless. Her expression had changed, no longer relaxed, no longer hiding. Her eyes tracked the faint silhouette of two distant dots moving parallel to their altitude. She knew the shape. Instantly, F-16s, she could almost feel their afterburners in her bones. The woman sitting next to her noticed her tense posture and asked if she was all right. Emily smiled faintly, brushed it off, and looked down at her watch. It wasn't an ordinary watch. It was a tactical flight chronometer, worn and scratched, stopped at a very specific time, Euro 3:47:12. The time of the last moment she remembered before everything went dark, years ago, over the Black Sea. In the cockpit, the captain received a priority transmission. It wasn't from air traffic control. It was a scrambled message, labeled for cockpit only. His co-pilot opened it, frowning in confusion. The message contained just two words: identify Phoenix. Neither of them knew what it meant. But when they asked over the intercom if any crew or passengers were named Phoenix, the cabin remained silent, except for Emily, who quietly reached into her bag and tightened her grip around the dog tag. Outside, the F-16s drew closer. Their formation tightened. The lead pilot radioed again, this time with urgency. "Command, confirm. Did you say Phoenix?" The controller hesitated, then replied, "Affirmative. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." The two fighter pilots exchanged looks inside their cockpits. Both had heard stories about her. The pilot who flew an impossible mission, the one who sacrificed her team to save hundreds, the one who never came home. Now somehow, she was sitting quietly on a passenger jet at 30,000 feet, and she wasn't supposed to exist. As night began to fall, the lights inside Flight 209 dimmed. The passengers were drifting into quiet sleep, unaware of the jets shadowing them on both sides, unaware that the sky around them was now part of a restricted military operation. Emily leaned back, eyes open, mind racing. She knew the call she had made from the airport, payphone before boarding this flight, hadn't gone unnoticed, and she knew what was coming next. The name Phoenix had been heard again, and somewhere deep within the Pentagon, red lights had started flashing, because if Phoenix was alive, then the mission that everyone thought was over was about to begin again. The night sky stretched endlessly over the Atlantic, a black ocean above a darker sea. Flight 209 cut through the silence like a silver ghost, its lights blinking rhythmically in the vast darkness. Passengers slept, unaware that history was quietly rewriting itself at 33,000 feet. Emily Carterant, known as Captain Phoenix, remained awake, her eyes fixed on the faint glimmer of the F-16s, escorting them from a distance. Her calm breathing masked the storm in her mind. Years of silence, of living under a new name, had vanished the moment that call sign reappeared in the airwaves. Somewhere far away, behind reinforced walls and glowing radar screens, a team of intelligence officers was already digging through archives sealed for over a decade. Files labeled Classified Operation Firebird were being reopened. 12 years earlier, Emily wasn't sitting in seat 15C. She was strapped inside the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, her name stitched beneath the American flag. Her squadron had been called the Firebirds, an elite group trained for missions that officially didn't exist. Their final assignment was over the Black Sea, a mission that spiraled into chaos. The objective: intercept a rogue aircraft believed to be carrying stolen U.S. military technology. But the radar signatures that night were deceptive. There were more aircraft than expected, and their transponders kept switching codes. Emily's wingman, call sign Hawk, was shot down first. Then another signal disappeared. Within minutes, the mission collapsed into confusion and static. Phoenix went silent. The official report claimed all 5 pilots perished when their jets went down in flames over international waters, but one didn't. Emily had ejected seconds before her aircraft exploded. She hit the freezing water, her parachute wrapping around her body like a trap. The impact broke her ribs. The cold took her breath. For hours she floated beneath a storm, watching lightning illuminate the wreckage burning on the horizon. When rescue aircraft arrived the next morning, they found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies. The Firebirds were declared lost. But Emily had been found just not by the Americans. A small coastal vessel belonging to an unmarked security group pulled her from the sea. Her dog tags were taken, her injuries treated, but her identity became a secret she was ordered never to reveal again. Someone inside that organization knew who she was and what she could do. They offered her a choice: disappear forever or work for them. She chose silence. For nearly a decade, Emily lived in the shadows, operating under different names in various corners of the world: contract missions, covert recoveries, silent operations that governments denied knowledge of. She became a ghost in the system, until 2 years ago when she vanished from everything. No trace, no contact. Now sitting on Flight 209, she was no longer a ghost. She had resurfaced in the most unexpected place possible. A civilian plane heading directly over a region connected to her past. Mission in the Pentagon's Situation Room. Satellite images of Flight 209 flickered on a giant screen. Analysts cross-checked the passenger list. When they saw the name Emily Carter, the database froze for a moment. The same biometric profile matched Captain Emily Carter, presumed dead since 2013. Senior officials exchanged uneasy glances. The codename Phoenix appeared in their classified archives more than once, connected to missions no longer acknowledged by the Air Force. The decision was made to track but not intercept. Direct confrontation could risk panic among passengers, but someone else wasn't following that order. Across the Atlantic, in a dark military installation hidden beneath the Carpathian Mountains, a private radar system had also detected Flight 209. A man in a gray suit watched the screen, sipping his coffee slowly. He knew that call sign back aboard Flight 209. Emily stared down at the worn-out notebook in her lap. The pages were filled with coordinates, sketches of flight paths, and names crossed out in red ink. It wasn't just a diary, it was a record of everything she had done to stay alive since the mission went dark. She turned to a page marked with a circle and a single phrase: Black Sea, unfinished business. Her instincts told her she was being watched, not just by the F-16s, but by someone else. The turbulence earlier wasn't natural. She knew the patterns of the sky better than anyone. Her hand brushed the side panel of her seat, feeling for something only a trained pilot would recognize, a faint vibration that didn't belong to a standard commercial aircraft. The sound of an external radar sweep. Someone had locked onto them. She breathed in deeply. Her heartbeat slowed, not out of fear but precision. The training she buried years ago began surfacing again, frame by frame. Every sound in the cabin became clearer. The hum of the engines, the faint hiss of cabin pressure, the rhythm of propulsive flow through the turbines. Emily was back in combat mode. Down below, the 2 F-16 pilots received new instructions through a secure frequency: maintain distance, no visual contact. But then a new blip appeared on their radar, small, fast, and approaching from the northeast. It wasn't supposed to be there. The lead pilot tilted his head toward the horizon, his HUD lighting up with a fast-approaching signature. It wasn't American. It wasn't transponding any code. Whoever they were closing in on Flight 209. NORAD scrambled again. Alarms triggered. Communication between air commands lit up with warnings. But over the Atlantic, time moved differently. Seconds stretched. The unidentified craft didn't respond to hails. It flew directly toward the civilian jet. And inside Flight 209, Emily Carter's instincts screamed before any alert went off. She could feel the air pressure change. Years of experience told her exactly what that meant. A supersonic intercept. At 37,000 feet, the unknown aircraft streaked past. Too fast for the passengers to notice, but enough for the cockpit radar to go haywire. The captain's monitors flickered, communications jammed, autopilot glitched. Emily's eyes narrowed. This wasn't random interference. It was deliberate. A warning shot. Whatever secret she thought had died with the Firebirds had just been reawakened, and someone didn't want her making it to New York. At NORAD, the lead analyst looked up from his monitor and whispered to his superior, "Sir, that interference pattern, it's the same code used during Operation Firebird." A chill ran through the room. Because if that was true, it meant one thing. Someone else from the Firebird mission was still alive, and now both of them were in the same sky again. She reached for her duffel bag. Inside was no weapon, just a folded piece of paper with a single number written on it. a number she hoped she would never have to call again. Phoenix. She had once stolen something from him, something that had never been recovered. The Atlantic night was darker than ink, the stars drowned by layers of cold, rolling clouds. Flight 209 sliced through the sky, its engines humming steady, but the peace was deceptive beneath that calm surface. Invisible radar waves were colliding, codes were clashing, and two ghosts from the past were drawing closer with every second. Inside the cockpit, the pilots fought to stabilize their systems. Communications had gone dead for 5 minutes, long enough to make any captain uneasy. But they had no idea that their plane was now at the center of an international standoff, silent and suspended between worlds. In seat 15C, Emily Carter Phoenix was no longer just a passenger. The reflection in her window showed it clearly. Two faint shapes keeping formation with their jet on both sides. Distant but deliberate. F-16s. Escorts. Protectors or watchers. Her fingers drummed on the armrest as she calculated altitudes, speeds, and air corridors in her mind. Old reflexes resurfaced like muscle memory. She could tell by the jet trail's angle that the fighters weren't flying in a protective pattern. They were boxing her in. They weren't guarding the plane. They were keeping it contained, hundreds of miles away, inside a mountain base where the walls were built to block even satellite signals. A man stared at a glowing screen showing a single commercial flight blinking red. He wasn't military anymore, though his posture still carried the precision of command. His code name, Raven, once the second-in-command of the Firebird Squadron. He had survived too, but not by accident. After the mission's collapse, he had been recovered by a foreign intelligence unit that promised him revenge. To the world, he was dead. To those who knew him, he was a weapon rebuilt from betrayal. And now, 12 years later, he had found Phoenix alive. He didn't want her dead, not yet. He wanted her to remember. The rogue aircraft that had just intercepted Flight 209 was his. A stealth prototype, small, agile, invisible to most radars. Its mission, send a message. At 37,000 feet, a sudden flash of light ripped through the clouds. The unidentified aircraft passed within 100 meters of the commercial jet, its shockwave rattling the fuselage. Passengers screamed awake. Oxygen masks dropped. Trays clattered. The cabin filled with chaos. But amidst it, Emily sat still, eyes tracking the faint silhouette vanishing into the night. She knew that maneuver. She had seen it before, one only a handful of pilots were capable of executing. Her breathing slowed. It couldn't be. Raven was dead. Unless he wasn't. The captain's voice came over the intercom, struggling to sound composed. The aircraft had suffered a minor systems disruption. Flight. Attendants hurried through the aisles, calming panicked passengers, resetting panels. But the truth was far from minor. Flight 209's navigation was completely compromised. She glanced at the cabin map on the screen in front of her. It showed a path, cutting north, away from New York. The coordinates drifted closer toward the North Atlantic Defense Zone, the same sector where the Firebird Squadron vanished 12 years ago. Her past was literally pulling her back. The plane was no longer flying its assigned route. It was being redirected, and only Emily noticed. In NORAD command, alarms continued to flash. A supervisor shouted new coordinates. The civilian flight had gone off course, and the F-16 escorts were reporting interference. Command authorized escalation to Eagle Red, classified protocol. The two fighter jets received new orders. If Flight 209 crossed into the restricted defense line, they were to force an immediate descent. But forcing down a commercial airliner with over 180 civilians wasn't a simple choice. The lead F-16 pilot hesitated. He had heard the name Phoenix hours earlier. Something inside told him this wasn't an ordinary hijack. Meanwhile, Raven's stealth jet coasted high above the chaos, invisible and silent. His onboard AI tracked the commercial jet's exact heading. He spoke into the encrypted channel, a channel only one other person in the world would recognize, a frequency once used by the Firebirds, the same one that now echoed faintly in Emily's ears through her noise-canceling earbuds. The signal was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. A series of coded tones, short, long, short, short. The same rhythm as her old squadron's distress beacon. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a random interception. It was a summons. In the dim cabin, Emily's reflection looked back at her through the dark window. layered against the faint gleam of the jets outside. She saw the woman she used to be, a pilot who lived and died by impossible missions. The one they buried in official reports, the one she thought she'd left behind. But the sky had called her back. Her notebook trembled in her hand as the plane jolted again. She flipped to the last page, one she had never dared to finish writing. A flight plan, coordinates leading to an unmarked island deep in the North Atlantic, a place that didn't exist on maps. That was where the Firebirds fell, and where something had been left behind. But the sky had called her back. Her notebook trembled in her hand as the plane jolted again. She flipped to the last page, one she had never dared to finish writing. A flight plan, coordinates leading to an unmarked island deep in the North Atlantic, a place that didn't exist on maps. That was where the Firebirds fell, and where something had been left behind. Below, the ocean stretched like an abyss. Lightning illuminated the clouds again, and for a brief instant, the silhouette of Raven's stealth aircraft appeared, sleek, black, unmarked. The F-16s didn't see it, but Emily did. She recognized its angular wings. She had helped design them during the Firebird testing program. Her jaw clenched. This wasn't an attack. It was an invitation. He wanted her to follow. And even though she was trapped on a civilian jet, part of her wanted to. In Washington, chaos rippled through intelligence channels. The code being transmitted from the stealth aircraft matched the encryption pattern used during Operation Firebird. That encryption had been sealed, deleted, and buried years ago. If it was transmitting again, it meant one horrifying truth. The Firebird project had never been destroyed. Someone had kept it alive. And now it was active again, because Phoenix was in the air. As the turbulence worsened, Flight 209's crew fought to stabilize their heading, unaware that the very skies they were flying through were becoming a battlefield of ghosts. The F-16s tried to close the gap, but every time they approached, their radar systems jammed. Emily could feel the shift in air, pressure, the subtle change that only a pilot could detect. A shadow passed above the clouds, briefly blocking out the moon. Then silence. Raven's jet vanished from sight, its engines fading like a whisper. But Emily knew what that meant. He wasn't gone. He was leading her somewhere. The plane's autopilot suddenly restored itself. The navigation screens flickered back to normal. The cabin lights stabilized. To the passengers, it seemed like the danger had passed. But Emily knew better. The coordinates had changed again, quietly, subtly. The new destination wasn't New York anymore. It was somewhere far off, across the North Atlantic. Somewhere she had promised never to return. Back in the command center, a young radar officer zoomed in on the flight path and froze. The coordinates matched an uncharted island, classified, decades ago as a defunct test site. He whispered the name out loud, Firebird Base. The senior officer turned pale. Flight 209 was heading straight toward it. And at that moment, Phoenix closed her notebook and looked out the window one last time. For the first time in 12 years, she whispered the only word that still meant anything. The word that had defined her, haunted her, and brought her back to the sky. Phoenix. The fire had been reignited. The ghosts were coming home. The Atlantic stretched endlessly beneath Flight 209, its dark surface shimmering with flashes of lightning. Inside, passengers began to relax, unaware that their route had quietly changed. In seat 15C, Emily Carter, Phoenix, sat motionless, eyes locked on the night sky. The turbulence wasn't random. The plane wasn't where it should be. Deep down, she knew exactly where they were heading. Through the storm clouds waited an island erased from every map, Firebird Base, a secret that should have stayed buried. In the cockpit, the pilots fought their controls. The autopilot had locked, communications jammed. Static filled the radio. Every attempt to turn back failed. The jetliner was flying itself. Far above, cloaked in shadow, Raven's stealth fighter watched. On his display, a blinking marker read, Firebird. For 12 years, he'd hunted the one person who survived that night, the one he believed betrayed him, the one codenamed Phoenix. He didn't know the truth. Emily reached into her small duffel bag and pulled out a silver data core, the only evidence of what really happened during Operation Firebird. It wasn't treason that ended the mission. It was cover-up. Their own commanders had turned on them. Raven's jet wasn't destroyed by the enemy. It was targeted by his own side. She had spent years hiding, waiting for the moment the truth could resurface. And now, fate had brought her right back to the ashes. She slipped from her seat and moved quietly to the rear of the aircraft. Beneath the floor, she found a maintenance hatch leading to the comms bay. Her hands worked with military precision, rewiring a dormant transmitter, sending out a single encrypted message across an old channel. Phoenix alive. Civilian flight compromised. Do not engage. If NORAD was still listening, they'd recognize the code. If not, this message would be her last. 2 F-16s arrived alongside the airliner, their lights flashing in warning. Orders came from command, forced descent. They dove beneath the aircraft, trying to guide it down, but the autopilot ignored them. The passengers screamed as turbulence ripped through the cabin. Luggage flew. Alarms blared. Then suddenly silence. The plane leveled. The storm cleared. Outside, a glowing mist revealed an island below, half-submerged hangars, rusted towers, the burned remains of runways. On the ground, Raven's stealth jet touched down first. His engines screamed against the corroded tarmac. Seconds later, the airliner descended hard, brakes shrieking, stopping just short of the old control tower. Emily looked out her window. Through the smoke and rain, she saw the faded insignia on a hangar door, a phoenix rising from flames, her past staring right back at her. She stood calm amid the chaos and walked toward the exit. Outside, the air smelled of salt and rust. Wind whipped across the broken runway. Raven waited near his jet, older, scarred, eyes filled with a decade of anger. Emily stopped a few meters away. She tossed the small data core onto the ground. It rolled, stopping at his boots. For the first time, his expression changed. He understood. Everything he'd believed, her betrayal, his hatred, was a lie. They had both been victims of the same mission. A low rumble shook the ground. One of the island's old fuel bunkers exploded, sending a column of flame into the sky. The shock wave tore across the runway, scattering debris and sparks. Emily didn't move. She watched the fire burn against the night, its glow reflected in her eyes. It looked exactly as it did 12 years ago, the night she earned the name Phoenix. Only this time, she wasn't running from the flames. Minutes later, NORAD reestablished contact. Rescue orders were issued. By dawn, helicopters arrived, but the island was empty. The passengers were found unharmed. The pilots safe. But there was no trace of Emily Carter or Raven. Only 2 sets of footprints leading toward the cliffs, and a charred phoenix symbol glowing faintly in the rubble. Weeks later, radar operators began reporting a strange signal over the Atlantic. No flight plan. No call sign, just a faint word appearing for a few seconds before fading away. Phoenix.